The neon sun dipped low on the horizon, casting jagged silhouettes across the skeletal remains of skyscrapers in the distance. Our armored convoy, half-rusted steel and patched wiring, clattered and groaned over the cracked remains of an ancient highway.
A simple supply run, they said.
Drop off some high-cap batteries, a few crates of ammo, and maybe snag some fresh neural link patches from an outpost. Straightforward. Easy money. No one ever expects a routine mission to go sideways. Up in the turret, a guy we called Nox had his chrome-plated smart rifle half-raised, his neural HUD glowing faintly in his cybernetic eyes. You know what this job needs?
Steak. And beer.
I'm talking sizzling cuts and ice-cold brews, not those protein bricks and electrolyte sludge packs they keep tossing at us. From the back seat, Rex, all rugged jaw and synthetic cheek plating, barked a laugh. You and your steak fantasies, man. You know what I miss?
Pizza.
Greasy, cheese-dripping, pepperoni-loaded pizza. Not that vacuum-sealed cardboard nonsense. Our driver, Mason, a lanky guy with a mechanical rig strapped to his spine, smirked without taking his eyes off the cracked road ahead. All I want is a hot meal that didn't come out of a ration dispenser. Roast chicken, buttery mashed potatoes, the works. Used to have it every Sunday back home. That's living. Forget food, muttered Jay, our radio tech, fiddling with the flickering hollow controls embedded in his wrist. His cybernetic fingers twitched as the signal sputtered. Just give me real coffee. The stuff that actually wakes you up. I swear, if I have to choke down another sachet of powdered sludge, I'm rerouting us to the nearest cafe. Mission be damned. Sarge Keller, our squad leader, leaned his scarred face back against his seat, eyes sharp and calculating despite his relaxed pose. Dream bigger, Jay. At this point, I'd settle for a crate of stale protein bars and a working comm signal. I sat sandwiched between Jay and Rex, my HUD dimmed to save power, watching the endless desert of fractured metal beams and scorched sand roll past the reinforced glass window. The air inside our armored beast was thick, stale sweat, old leather, and the faint tang of recycled oxygen. Cybernetics or not, nothing could filter out the exhaustion etched into every one of us. The city ruins eventually gave way to desolation, jagged rocks, rusted wreckage, and the occasional glimmer of bioluminescent fungi clinging stubbornly to crevices. Out here, every flicker of light and shadow played tricks on your mind. And tricks could be deadly. Then it happened. The armored rig groaned, then shuddered violently before jerking to a dead stop. Mason slammed the controls. What the hell now? He toggled the ignition again, but all we got was a dull, repetitive clicking sound. Nox ducked down from his turret hatch, his bionic eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Tell me this isn't because of something dumb, Mason. Did you fry a relay or something? No idea, Mason muttered, already unclipping his seat harness. Jay, bring a flashlight. We'll check the engine core. Jay sighed heavily, his arm holos flickering to cast a weak glow as he followed Mason out into the oppressive heat of the wasteland. One by one, the rest of us dismounted, combat boots hitting the cracked earth with dull thuds. The desert stretched around us in endless dunes of rust-colored sand and scattered debris. The sun had dipped low enough now to cast eerie purple hues across the sky, the neon veins of distant refineries glowing faintly on the horizon. Hours crawled by, and Mason and Jay were still buried under the hood of our transport, hollow tools sparking faintly as they tinkered with dead circuits and fried wiring. I sat propped against one of the armored wheels, the heat of the day fading into the icy bite of desert night. Finally, Sarge slammed the hood shut with enough force to send a metallic echo into the night air.
She's dead.
Signal's out too. Called for backup on the secure line, but it'll be hours before anyone rolls out here. Nox dropped onto the sand, resting his smart rifle across his knees. Perfect. Stuck out here, in the middle of techno-nowhere. Exactly what I signed up for. Look at it this way, Rex said, sitting cross-legged nearby. At least you have time to rethink every questionable life choice you've made. As the night wrapped around us like a cold shroud, the light chatter turned into heavier conversations. Hey, Mason. Knox said, staring up at the digital stars blinking faintly in the sky. What are you gonna do when all this is over? Mason leaned against the rig, wiping oil-stained hands on his synth fiber pants.
Dunno.
Maybe go back to school. Teach, maybe. I've dealt with people harder to handle than students. Knox snorted. You? Teaching? Yeah, right. Mason gave him a look and smirked. If I can deal with you, I can deal with anyone. Laughter rippled through us briefly, a fragile warmth in the cold. Then Mason turned to me. What about you, Astra? Ever think about what happens after all this? I hesitated, my neural interface feeding me diagnostics from my cybernetic arm.
No clue.
Normal life's not really in the cards, is it? You can't unsee this world once you've been neck-deep in its guts. Rex's voice softened. You'd be good at patching people up, you know. Medic work suits you. Calm under pressure. Knox smirked faintly. And you've had plenty of practice fixing us up. I rolled my eyes.
Yeah, sure.
Sign me up for more gore and trauma.
Pass.
The cold deepened as the night dragged on, and the stillness grew heavier, like a weighted blanket of dread. Then, a sound, a faint rustling carried on the wind. Knox froze, his smart rifle humming faintly as it powered up. You hear that? Probably just the wind, Sarge said, though his cybernetic hand was already hovering near his pistol. But it wasn't the wind. 2 pairs of glowing yellow eyes emerged from the shadows. Then 4. A pack of cybermutts stepped into the faint neon glow of our rig's emergency lights, their sleek metallic exoskeletons glinting under the sky. Stay cool, Sarge said calmly, raising a hand. Don't spook them. The pack circled, their joints whirring faintly as they moved. After what felt like an eternity, they finally turned and disappeared into the dark. Jay exhaled slowly. I am never complaining about base rations again. But the desert wasn't done with us yet. Not even close. Nguyen's voice crackled through the squad comms, edged with uncertainty. Did anyone else see that? I shifted slightly, my neural HUD flickering faintly as I scanned the horizon. See what, Jay? I got nothing on visual. His augmented fingers twitched nervously against the hollow controls embedded in his forearm.
No, seriously.
There was delight. Out there. Like a flicker, maybe a flashlight. Mason stepped up beside me, his chrome-plated pistol already half-drawn, optics scanning the same stretch of darkness. Where exactly, Jay? Point it out. Nguyen jabbed a cybernetic finger toward the dunes, his voice tight. Out there. Just for a second, like someone signaling. We all turned our eyes to the dark expanse, the faint hum of our rig's emergency lights buzzing softly in the silence. But the desert stared back, empty and still. Your optics must be glitching, Rex said, his voice forced into nonchalance, but edged with tension. Even as I tried to dismiss it, the silence felt thicker, heavier, like something unseen was pressing down on us from every direction. Not long after, Knox spun around, his smart rifle snapping into firing position. Footsteps. I swear to whatever glitchy gods out there, I heard footsteps behind us. Everyone froze. Cybernetic limbs, enhanced optics, and augmented ears all focused outward into the void. The sand underfoot was still, and the air was eerily silent. Nothing. This place isn't right, Knox muttered, the bravado in his voice long gone. His smart rifle whirred faintly as its targeting systems swept the area. Feels like we walked straight into a ghost protocol, I murmured under my breath, my mechanical fingers flexing around the grip of my sidearm. Sarge Keller stepped forward, his augmented arm glowing faintly along the seams as his neural implants spiked with activity. All right, pull it together. This is just sleep deprivation, dehydration, and too many hours staring into the void. Everyone, reset your HUDs, keep your weapons at low ready, and stay sharp. But even Keller didn't sound convinced. The quiet hung heavy around us, punctuated only by the occasional static pop from Jay's malfunctioning radio link. Then, slicing through the dead stillness, came a sound that didn't belong. A whistle.
Sharp. Piercing.
It hung in the air for just a moment before fading into the void, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt suffocating. Knox's voice crackled through clenched teeth. Nope, absolutely not. This is glitched to hell.
Formation.
Now, Keller barked. His tone was sharp, slicing through our unease like a blade. We clustered into a defensive semicircle, weapons drawn and pointed outward into the abyss. The faint glow of my ocular HUD painted diagnostic data across my vision, but nothing, no heat signatures, no movement blips, popped up. This is fragged, Sarge. Knox's voice cracked slightly as he adjusted his grip on his rifle. We stayed like that, tense still, wired so tight you could have plucked a sound from our nerves for what felt like hours. Then, salvation came in the form of distant lights. Twin beams of harsh, white sliced through the dark, growing brighter with every passing second. The unmistakable rumble of an armored engine followed, vibrating through the cracked ground. Humvee inbound, Rex called out, his voice tight with relief. We lowered our weapons as the armored transport pulled up beside us, dust and sand billowing in chaotic clouds as it skidded to a halt. A soldier named Hitch jumped out, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly in the dark. What the hell happened to you lot? You look like you've been ghosted. Keller clapped him on the shoulder. Something like that. You brought tow chains. Another soldier, low, hoisted a heavy crate out of the back of their rig. Chains, fuel, and enough grit to drag you lot out of this mess. Strap in, it's gonna be a slow haul. There was no complaining.
No grumbling.
Just quiet efficiency as we secured our transport to theirs. The rest of us climbed into the second Humvee while Keller and Mason stayed behind to steer the dead rig. As the convoy rumbled back toward the distant neon haze of our forward base, no one spoke. The dull glow of HUD lights reflected in hollow, haunted eyes. Whatever had happened out there in the neon desert, whatever shadows had crept into the corners of our augmented vision, it had left its mark. Some things don't fade with time, and some silences stay with you, long after the noise returns. Under the cold neon haze of approaching dawn, the Humvee's reinforced wheels crunched over broken glass and jagged asphalt as we rolled back toward the base. The faint hum of machinery and the distant flicker of holographic billboards felt strangely comforting after the oppressive silence of the wasteland. But no one spoke. We sat in eerie quiet, each of us staring into the dim glow of our HUDs or out the narrow slits of the armored rig's windows. Rex finally broke the silence, his voice low and tight. That place, whatever it was, I don't want to see it again. Knox gave a slow nod, his optics still flickering from residual interference. It wasn't just the dark or the dogs. It felt wrong, like something watching us from behind the edges of reality. Jay's hollow display crackled slightly as he adjusted the frequency on his wrist-mounted radio. No chatter on the network. Whatever happened out there, it's like the desert swallowed it whole. Sarge Keller's voice crackled through the comms, steady but grim. Stay sharp. We're almost home, but don't let your guard down until we're inside the perimeter. The towering steel walls of the FOB, Forward Operating Base, finally came into view, crowned with automated turrets and flickering security drones. The gate creaked open after a brief retinal scan from Mason, and the convoy rolled into the base. The familiar scent of ozone, industrial grease, and stale recycled air hit me as I stepped onto solid ground. Inside the base, everything felt off. The guards at the gate stood rigid, their helmets obscuring their expressions, but I caught the way their fingers twitched over their trigger guards. Something had them spooked. Jay nudged me as we walked past a barricade. You feel that? I nodded. Like static on your implants? Yeah, I feel it. It wasn't much, just a faint buzzing at the back of my skull, like an old radio trying to tune into a dead frequency. It made my neural interface feel itchy. We stowed our weapons in the armory and made our way to the debrief room. Inside, a sharp-faced officer named Lieutenant Harris waited for us, her cybernetic left eye flickering with data streams as she analyzed us one by one. Report, she said crisply, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Keller stepped forward, his boots clanging against the grated floor. Engine failure in the wasteland. Communications were unstable. We experienced anomalies. Anomalies? Harris tilted her head slightly, her eye whirring as it zoomed in on Keller. Explain. Keller hesitated for half a second before speaking. Visual and auditory distortions. Shadows.
Sounds.
We encountered a pack of cybermutts, aggressive, but they didn't attack. There was a whistle. It wasn't random. It was intentional. The room went dead silent. Harris's mechanical fingers drummed against the edge of the metal table. You're sure it wasn't fatigue or environmental stress? No, ma'am, Keller said firmly. It was deliberate. It felt like we weren't alone out there. Harris stood still for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned sharply to Jay. Radio logs.
Now.
Jay tapped his wrist holodisplay and transferred our convoy's communication logs. Harris glanced at them briefly before her eye dimmed. You're dismissed.
Get some rest.
But stay within base limits. No one leaves until I say so. We filed out of the debriefing room, and the tension followed us like a phantom. Back in the barracks, the familiar hum of air purifiers and faint glow of overhead LEDs felt almost suffocating. I dropped onto my cot, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Rex sat on the edge of his bed, his augmented arm whirring faintly as he flexed the mechanical fingers. She knows something. Harris, I mean. Knox leaned against the wall, his smart rifle propped up beside him. She looked too calm, like she's seen this before. Jay was still fiddling with his holodisplay, frustration etched into his face. Something's wrong with the logs. There's a gap. About 10 minutes of dead air. No data. Just static. The buzzing in my head, it was still there, faint but persistent. I rubbed at my temples. Whatever's out there, whatever we felt, it didn't stay in the desert. It followed us back. We all went quiet again, letting those words settle like dust in the air. Hours passed in uneasy silence. Sleep was impossible. Every flicker of light, every faint creak of metal, made me flinch. At some point, alarms blared across the FOB. Red emergency lights bathed the barracks in an ominous glow, and a mechanical voice crackled through the speakers. Unauthorized breach detected. Perimeter compromised. All units, prepare for lockdown. We scrambled to gear up. Knox was already strapping into his combat rig, his smart rifle glowing faintly as its systems booted up. Jay tapped into his holodisplay, trying to pull up security feeds. Movement near Sector C, he said, his voice tight. No visuals, but something's tripping the sensors. We stormed out into the base corridors, weapons drawn. The crimson lights painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the base itself was holding its breath. When we reached Sector C, we found 2 guards lying on the ground. Their visors flickered with faint static, and their limbs were contorted at impossible angles. Knox cursed under his breath. What the hell could have done this? I stepped closer, my HUD scanning their biosigns. Flatlines. Whatever happened, it was quick and brutal. Jay's voice crackled in our comms. There. Movement, upper catwalk. I looked up just in time to see a shadow flicker across the graded walkway above us. It moved unnaturally fast, almost like it was glitching through reality. Keller raised his rifle, his voice sharp. Eyes up. Stay tight. The shadow dropped down, landing in front of us with a metallic clang. It was humanoid barely. Its body was a twisted mix of metal and flesh, its face obscured by a cracked, flickering visor. Its hands ended in long, serrated blades that dripped with something dark and viscous. It let out a sharp, static-filled screech before charging at us. Open fire. Keller barked. Our weapons lit up the corridor with bursts of light and concussive blasts, bullets and plasma rounds tearing through the thing's flesh. It staggered but kept moving, its body twitching and reforming as if it was pulling itself back together. I fired a burst from my energy pistol, aiming for its visor. The shot hit true, and the creature froze mid-step, a faint high-pitched whine emanating from deep within its core. Then it collapsed, its broken form sparking and twitching on the floor. The lights overhead flickered violently, and for a brief moment, I swore I could hear that whistle. Knox's voice crackled through the comms. "This isn't over. Whatever that was, there's more of them." And deep down, I knew he was right. The shadows we brought back from the desert weren't done with us yet. The flickering lights above buzzed faintly, casting warped shadows over the twisted remains of whatever we'd just gunned down. Its body, if you could call it that, lay sprawled across the grated floor, its segmented metal plating still twitching. A faint static hum lingered in the air, clawing at the edges of my neural HUD like a virus trying to crawl into my skull. Sarge Keller stepped forward cautiously, the barrel of his plasma rifle still glowing faintly from the last shot. "Jay, scan this thing. I want answers." Jay crouched beside the body, his wrist-mounted holo display flaring to life as he ran a deep scan. His cybernetic fingers trembled slightly as they danced across the interface. It's not organic. Well, not entirely. There are traces of human DNA in the tissue matrix, but it's fused with something else. Like rogue nanites.
Nanotech corruption.
Knox muttered, his voice dripping with disbelief. That's black market tech. No way something like this ends up in the middle of nowhere by accident. Rex knelt beside the body, inspecting the glistening black fluid seeping from its fractured plates. His mechanical fingers dipped into the viscous substance, and his neural HUD began running a chemical analysis. This stuff isn't blood. It's synthetic, some kind of liquid neural interface lubricant. Industrial grade, not military. Keller's voice cut through the air like a razor. "We're pulling back to command. Whatever this is, Harris needs to see it." We moved quickly, boots pounding against the steel walkways as we made our way back through the winding corridors of the FOB. Every flicker of light, every faint creak of metal, set my nerves on edge. My cybernetic arm twitched involuntarily as my neural link strained against the oppressive static still crawling through the base's internal network. The silence was suffocating. When we reached command, Lieutenant Harris was already waiting for us. Her cybernetic eye pulsed with faint light as she processed the fragmented data Jay had sent her on our approach. Behind her, a wall of holo displays projected chaotic streams of corrupted data, security feeds looping fragmented frames, motion sensors flashing red, and biosignatures blinking in and out. "What happened out there, Keller?" Harris demanded, her mechanical hand gripping the edge of the table hard enough to leave dents in the metal. Keller didn't flinch. "Nanotech anomaly. Human integration, corrupted systems. It wasn't just a glitch, Lieutenant. It was deliberate." Harris's eye flickered as she processed his words. "How many did you encounter?" "One," Keller replied. "But it moved like it was connected to something bigger. It wasn't acting alone." Harris's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's impossible. Any rogue nanotech systems are supposed to be isolated and purged on detection. This isn't rogue, it's coordinated." A sharp static crackle erupted from the holo displays behind her, and for a brief moment, every screen displayed the same thing, a faint silhouette, humanoid but distorted, its features obscured by digital artifacts. Then it vanished, leaving behind garbled code scrolling rapidly across every display. Harris turned sharply toward Jay. "Lock this base down. Full blackout protocol.
No outgoing transmissions."
If whatever's out there can piggyback on our network, we're already compromised." Jay's fingers danced across his holo interface, and the lights dimmed slightly as heavy blast doors slammed shut across every external access point. The quiet hum of external comms died abruptly. I turned toward Keller. "What now? We can't just sit here and wait for whatever's out there to find another way in." Before Keller could respond, a deep, metallic groan reverberated through the walls, followed by a distant screech that made my neural interface buzz painfully. Lights flickered again, and Jay swore under his breath. "Motion sensors, Sector D," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's not just one this time. There are multiple signatures moving through the maintenance tunnels below us." Harris grabbed a plasma pistol from the table. "You're all with me. We end this now before they breach central operations." We moved out, weapons charged and ready, the faint glow of our HUDs illuminating the narrow maintenance corridors as we descended into the bowels of the base. The air grew colder, damp with condensation dripping from overhead pipes. Steam hissed from broken vents, curling around our feet like ghostly tendrils. Jay's voice crackled in my earpiece. "They're close. 20 meters ahead, moving fast." We rounded a corner, and the corridor ahead erupted in chaos. Shadows moved with unnatural speed, darting across the dim emergency lights. Figures lunged out of the darkness, metallic limbs, jagged edges, glowing eyes. "Fire!" Keller barked. The corridor lit up with a barrage of plasma rounds and energy pulses. My cybernetic arm recoiled with every shot, my pistol's muzzle glowing hot as it unleashed concentrated bursts into the advancing figures. One went down, its visor shattering as a plasma bolt ripped through its faceplate, but two more were already charging from behind it. Knox's smart rifle barked, rounds tracking targets with pinpoint precision as he backed up toward the bulkhead doors. Rex unleashed a high-frequency pulse grenade, and the blast sent two figures crashing against the walls in a shower of sparks. One of the creatures lunged toward Jay, its serrated blade arms raised high. Without thinking, I grabbed him by the shoulder, yanking him back just as the blade sliced through the space he'd been standing in. My pistol found the creature's visor, and a single energy round punched through its skull. The silence that followed was punctuated only by the crackle of exposed wiring and the hiss of steam from fractured pipes. We regrouped, breathing hard, weapons still raised. The air was thick with the metallic scent of coolant and the faint stink of burning polymers. "We need to seal this section," Harris said, her voice firm despite the faint tremor in it. "Jay, override the door controls and lock it down." Jay's fingers flew across his wrist display, and the heavy bulkhead doors groaned shut behind us. Red emergency lights cast long shadows as they flickered overhead. Rex leaned against a nearby pipe, his face streaked with grime and sweat. "What the hell are these things? They aren't drones and they aren't people." Harris's mechanical eye pulsed faintly. "There's something in between. A fusion of human biology and corrupted nanotech. Someone built these things, and they didn't do it out here by accident." I clenched my jaw, the static hum in my neural interface now a constant, irritating buzz. "Then whoever built them isn't done. This wasn't an attack, it was a test." Harris nodded grimly. "And we just proved they can breach a fortified military base." The faint sound of distant whistling echoed down the corridor again, carrying on a non-existent breeze. It wasn't just random noise, it was a signal. "They're regrouping," Keller said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at the others, my cybernetic fingers tightening around my weapon. "Then we don't have much time left." Whatever this was, whatever we'd stumbled into out in the neon wasteland, it wasn't finished with us. And we weren't getting out of this alive unless we found a way to shut it down permanently. The faint whistle echoed again, a haunting, high-pitched sound that cut through the static hum in my neural interface. It was distant, yet somehow it felt like it was right next to my ear, like it was inside my head. I glanced at Jay, who was furiously typing commands into his hollow display, sweat beading on his forehead. Knox's smart rifle was locked and glowing faintly as his optics swept every shadow. "We're out of time," Harris said, her voice tight and sharp. "Whatever signal they're using, it's getting stronger. They know we're here, and they're adapting." Keller's voice came over our comms, low but firm. "Command says they've identified a central frequency buried deep in the static interference. If we can find its source and shut it down, we might disrupt whatever's controlling these things." "Let me guess," I said, reloading my plasma pistol with a sharp click. The source is in the worst possible place. Maintenance sublevel 3. Jay said grimly, his holo display projecting a map of the base. It's deep below us, near the primary coolant systems. If they've nested down there, it'll be like walking into a hornet's nest. Knox adjusted his rifle. Better than sitting up here and waiting to die. Let's move. We descended deeper into the base, following flickering emergency lights and the faint, sickly glow of coolant pipes snaking along the walls. The temperature dropped sharply, and condensation clung to every surface like a cold sweat. My boots splashed in shallow puddles of chemical runoff, and every sound echoed back to us distorted and warped. The deeper we went, the more the static buzz in my implants grew. My HUD glitched intermittently, throwing up fragmented warning signs and garbled text across my vision. I caught Knox shaking his head and muttering under his breath, probably fighting the same interference. When we reached sublevel 3, the air was so cold that vapor drifted from our mouths with every breath. The corridor ahead stretched into darkness, illuminated only by the occasional flicker of malfunctioning LED strips. The faint sound of dripping water, or coolant, echoed somewhere up ahead. Jay stopped, his holo display glowing faintly as he scanned the area. I'm picking up multiple signatures. They're scattered, but they're moving fast. Stay close, Keller ordered. Weapons hot, eyes sharp. We crept forward, weapons raised, every step slow and deliberate. My enhanced optics struggled against the haze of coolant mist hanging in the air, distorting everything into vague shapes and faint outlines. A sudden screech tore through the corridor ahead of us, and two figures lunged from the mist. The first creature, jagged metal fused with sinewy flesh, crashed into Keller, sending him sprawling against the wall. Its serrated arm came down, and Keller barely blocked it with his reinforced forearm plating. Sparks flew as the blade scraped against his cybernetic limb. The second creature came for me. I raised my plasma pistol, firing twice into its chest. The first shot staggered it, and the second punched a hole clean through its torso. It fell, twitching and sparking, but its lifeless visor still glowed faintly with that eerie, pulsing light. Knox spun on his heel, his smart rifle locking onto the first creature still grappling with Keller. A single precision round slammed into its exposed neck joint, and it crumpled to the ground. Jay's voice crackled in the comms. We're close to the signal. It's right below us. We found a hatch at the end of the corridor, rusted and dripping coolant from its edges. Keller pried it open, and a wave of icy air hit us, carrying with it the faint scent of burnt circuits and something rotten. We climbed down one by one, descending a narrow maintenance ladder into a cavernous chamber lit only by faint blue coolant pools and the flickering glow of emergency lights. Massive pipes snaked across the ceiling, dripping condensation, while old maintenance consoles flickered with corrupted code. In the center of the chamber stood a towering machine, an amalgamation of steel, cables, and pulsing red lights. It looked ancient, like it had been abandoned and left to rot decades ago. Thick cables snaked from its base, pulsing faintly with crimson light as if the machine itself was alive. At its base, dozens of the creatures were hunched over, their visors glowing faintly as they worked in synchronized silence. They were patching wires, reconnecting conduits, keeping the machine alive. Jay's voice was barely a whisper. That's the source. That thing is the signal. Keller raised his rifle. Then we shut it down. Now. Before he could give the order, the machine's central light flared blindingly bright, and every creature in the room froze in unison. Then, one by one, they turned to face us. Nope, Knox muttered. Nope, nope, nope. The creatures screeched in unison, and chaos erupted. They surged forward, clawing and leaping across the coolant-soaked floor. Plasma bolts and smart rifle rounds tore through the air, illuminating the chaos with flashes of blue and orange light. My neural HUD was overwhelmed with target markers and proximity alerts, glitching as the static interference grew worse. One of the creatures leapt at me, its serrated arm raised high. I sidestepped, my cybernetic arm snapping upward to deflect the blow before firing my pistol point-blank into its visor. It collapsed in a heap, sparks crackling from its broken faceplate. Nox unleashed a barrage of suppressive fire, his rifle glowing red-hot from overuse. Jay, how do we shut this thing down? Jay was crouched behind a console, frantically typing into his hollow display.
There's a central core inside that thing.
We have to overload it manually. It's the only way to disrupt the signal. Then let's go.
Keller barked.
We pushed forward, carving a bloody path through the swarm. Rex hurled another high-frequency pulse grenade, the shockwave throwing several creatures backward and buying us precious seconds. Keller reached the machine's core access panel, slamming it open. Inside, a swirling mass of red light and nanotech tendrils pulsed violently. It's gonna blow when we overload it, Jay shouted. We'll have less than 60 seconds to get out. Keller jammed a plasma charge into the core, his augmented arm twisting the device into place. Alarms erupted from the machine, its red light intensifying as the nanotech tendrils writhed and screamed like a living thing. Move! Keller roared. We ran, sprinting back toward the ladder, bullets and plasma fire cutting down the last few creatures in our path. My HUD was screaming proximity warnings as the static grew deafening. As we scrambled up the ladder, the chamber below erupted in a blinding explosion of red light and superheated coolant. The force of the blast slammed into us, and I felt myself being thrown upward. We crashed onto the grated floor above, the explosion's aftershock rattling every bone in my body. The air was filled with smoke, steam, and the faint scent of burning circuitry. The static hum in my neural interface faded. My HUD recalibrated. It was over. Or at least that's what I thought. From somewhere deep below, faint and distant, came one last whistle. And I realized with a sinking feeling, it wasn't over. Not yet.